Hello class and professor, my name is Clipchamp and I'm here to talk to you about Chapter 9, Speaking Style Using Language. So our learning objectives for this chapter are to be able to create speech content that blends oral and written styles both at the same time, so we can get the best of both written and oral style. And then we also need to learn how to effectively incorporate vivid language that fits speech content for a specific audience. So, distinction between oral and written style. Oral style usually uses simpler sentences than written style. And then when speaking, you can look directly into the faces of your listeners. So if you sense that they do not understand your point, you can adjust your phrasing or your idea by adding an example or even asking your listeners if they're confused. Meanwhile, written style does not have this advantage. And when it comes to written style, you have to use appropriate grammar and include well-constructed sentences and the right punctuation and spelling, or else you'll diminish your individual credibility if you send a written message with obvious grammatical and spelling mistakes. But when it comes to oral, the listeners are too distracted to focus on the formality of the sentence, and grammar is not even like part of it. And so the electronic age like YouTube, TV, Facebook, and even messages like Twitter and etc., this new model is more personal, informal, dramatic, and vivid, especially things like TV and YouTube. They thrive on clever sound bites and with compelling storylines. But on the other hand, the traditional style is factual, formal, organized, personal. Nowadays, it comes like as bland when it comes to visual media. And so the challenge for you as a speaker is to be able to blend both of the traditional and the new modern styles, which is the electronic style, to make that great combination. And so what you need to do is clarity in what you mean, which is like oral style works most effectively when language is clear and understandable. So avoiding jargon, jargon is basically like an example of, I'm going to give you an example of jargon. Like, let's say lawyers, they have a specific language that they use, like kind of lingo, and like the people in the medical field, they have specific words that they use that normal people, or not normal people, but people from different professions, they won't understand the meaning of those words. So you want to avoid using those so everyone in the audience is able to understand everything that you're saying. And euphemism can create unnecessary, even purposeful confusion. Like some funny examples, like Rolls-Royce, they claim that their cars, they don't break down. They just fail to proceed. So they don't want to tell you like, oh, our cars, like they break down or they fail or they don't work. They'll put it into a nicer way, which is like fail to proceed. Or even the nuclear power industry for years objected to claims that their power plants could explode. So instead of them using that, they objected, and they used like the worst case scenario we were told was spontaneous energetic disassembly, which is basically the same meaning as explode, but we'll put it into a nicer way so it's not as dramatic. And then finally, use slang. Use slang, but slang is like highly informal, so you need to know your audience and know what kind of slang they use. And if you're not very familiar with the audience, it's best if you stay away from slang or use slang that's very well known, that not maybe certain people of the group will understand it.
My name is Noah Castillo, and I'm going to talk about the remaining portion of Chapter 9, Speaking Style, Using Language. I'm going to go over the learning objectives once again, just like my partner did earlier. The first one is construct speech content that blends oral and written styles to engage an audience in the electronic age. 2. Effectively incorporate clear and precise language that fits speech content for a given audience. And last but not least, effectively incorporate vivid language that fits speech content for a given audience. Alright, so first up we're going to be talking about precision, about picking the appropriate words. So with speeches these days, you got to really be careful with the words you use, because you need to know what exactly those words mean. A clear example would, for someone who does not know how to use the words carefully, would be Yogi Bear. An example that the book used was how he would say our similarities are different, which doesn't really make any sense because I don't think he knows what he's talking about. The second point would be to eliminate sexist language, especially during speeches and written essays. Using the incorrect words can diminish your credibility, and that's not something you really want to happen, to lose your credibility, because then no one is ever going to listen to you. For the eliminating sexist language, using words such as police officer and firefighter are perfect, rather than using words such as policeman or fireman, which is just only talking about the men instead of women, as both of them are in both fields. You also got to worry about words that are too vague, that need concrete reference. Reference are words that are basically extra words needed to explain a word that one does not really use. And then the picture in this slide for the 3 arrows, only, it's an example of an ambiguous sign. This slide we're going to be talking about vividness and painting a picture when presenting and when talking. So you need to, obviously you can overuse with metaphors and similes, but when using them perfect, they really enhance your speech. So a metaphor is an implied comparison of two seemingly dissimilar things. And an example of a metaphor that the book used is a hospital bed is a parked taxi with the meter running. So it's basically, even though a hospital and a taxi don't have anything really in common, the one thing in common they do have is that they're both going to charge you a lot. And then with simile, a simile is an explicit comparison of two seemingly dissimilar things, using the words like or as, similar to the metaphor, but with this you have to use the words like or as. An example would be hungry as a bear. Like a person can get hungry and say, "Oh, I'm hungry as a bear." Like, yeah, that person will eat a lot, but nothing compared to a bear, especially before hibernation, as bears eat a lot. And one thing about speeches is to try to avoid cliches. A cliche is a once vivid expression that has been overused to the point of seemingly commonplace. A common cliche is, "Oh, I'm going to give it 100%, 110%. At this point, it's better to be creative than just use common cliches, because it helps better illustrate your speech, rather than having the audience listening to something they've already heard and probably relate to that instead." And with the picture is referring to cliches with a fortune cookie you'll probably get at a Chinese restaurant or fast food place. It says think outside the box. How funny. With giving speeches, you always got to be able to speak up and have a strong and nice sound of bass. You need to have good alliteration, the repetition of the same word, usually on a consistent sound. Repetition, reiterating the same word, phrase, or sentence, usually with the same parallel structure. An example of that would be MLK's "I Have a Dream" speech. It's maybe the most memorable example for repetition. And with repetition is better used in speeches rather than essays, because with speeches, There is an audience response, while essays, the reader might get bored of reading the same thing over and over again. And an antithesis, which is a sentence composed of two parts with parallel structures but opposite meanings to create impact. A great example that the book used was John F. Kennedy when he said, "Ask not what you can do for this country, ask what you can do for your country." Uh, Basically, with speaking up, you got to develop your own style with it, whether you like using alliteration more, or repetition. And thank you guys for listening.